Okay. Hi, Jade. How are you?
Hi, Douglas. I'm doing good. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for coming on the show. It's nice to meet you. Nice to have you here. Is this your first book?
This is my very first book.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Why'd you decide to write a book?
Man, it was kind of a few different things that came together all at once. I did not ever see myself writing books growing up. I didn't think I wanted to be an author, but during the pandemic, I found myself just really craving a creative outlet, something long that I can get lost in. So there was that happening, the pandemic isolation, wanting a little bit of creative escape. I was also quarantining in the pandemic with my family at my mom's house in my childhood home. So I was looking at my childhood bookcase every day, and I started rereading a lot of those books from my childhood. And that was kind of percolating on one level. And I think the third part that kind of came together was the context of the time I wrote the book as well. Was it was the pandemic, but it was also the summer of 2020, which was the summer of all the Black Lives Matter uprisings. So there was a very emotional, tumultuous summer. And I, during the days, was spending time going to protest and organizing events and was really inspired by a lot of the young people I was seeing at those protests, like particularly like the teenagers and the high school students who they brought Bluetooth speakers, they were playing music, there was dancing, and it was such a different energy from any other protest space I'd been in before. So I was also just thinking about young people and the stories that, and the energy that they were bringing to this space. So kind of all three of those components ended up weaving together where one day I sat down and decided I wanted to write a YA book. But it came out of the blue for me a little bit.
Well, you know what? It's nice to hear that there was some positive energy coming out of the protests in 2020 because the news media portrayed that as completely negative and
Right.
a lot of riots and violence and you know
Yeah.
that's not the message that I think
Right.
people want to send.
Right. And I think that it was a time where, there was obviously all of the pain and the hurt and the trauma and all of that, but there was also so much solidarity and love. And I think people were just, it ended up being a time where I felt really connected to my community as well. So it definitely, it was a both and. There was the painful stuff, but there was also so much, a surprising amount of like warmth during that time as well to kind of help us all as a community cope with everything that was going on.
Your character's name is Rhea, is that right?
Yeah,
Okay.
Rhea, yes.
Is this based on you at all? Is there any part of you in Rhea?
She's not based off of me, but um I did give her a couple of things that are similar to me where I wanted her to have some of the experiences that I had growing up, particularly around being part of a really deeply interconnected, neighborhood and a community. I was really looking out for her. Like when I was growing up, I grew up in a place where even today, like it's still referred to as like the village, like this collective of like neighbors, friends, aunties, uncles, cousins who I felt very supported by. And it was the type of environment where if my mom couldn't pick me up from school one day, there was um, someone like a neighbor who could come pick me up. If one of my friends didn't have dinner at their house one day, open door policy, they could just walk down to our house, sit down at the table. And it was really nice to grow up in that environment and have that social safety net created by everyone around me. And so I did give that to Rhea so that she would have this experience of understanding what it's like to be part of a community worth protecting and worth fighting for, and for her to feel that sense of safety. So I definitely gave her a lot of like my affection for my real neighborhood, but I also I also gave her a little bit of my own like teen rage that I still remember being like 15 and angry and being afraid of the world changing, your friend group changing, your neighborhood changing, your own relationships with yourself changing on top of it. I remember feeling very overwhelmed by all of those emotions at that age. So there are some of the core emotions we share, but I think in terms of personality, we're a little bit different. I like to think I'm a little bit less prickly than she is, but yeah, we have some core things in common, but personalities are pretty different.
The theme, at least from what I can gather from your bio, is about gentrification of the particular neighborhood that she grows up in, right? And
Yes.
gentrification is kind of a double edged sword. It depends on which side of the sword you're on, because the people that are coming in think that, oh, they're going to improve the neighborhood, they're going to dump millions of dollars into it, refurbish old buildings, make them new, turn them around for a profit, and then you've got $1 million condos in places that the people who lived there before probably can't afford.
Right. Right.
So I'm getting the sense that this is sort of Rhea's protest to that happening. Is it? Would that be correct?
Yeah, that's really correct because I think that, I think there's a lot of different ways to define gentrification, but for me, when I was writing the book, I was really thinking of gentrification as particularly like as a process that displaces and excludes low income residents and businesses of color. And while it's excluding them, it's also systematically altering the class composition and the character of a neighborhood. But in particular, like when I think of gentrification, I'm also thinking of it as a process that resegregates communities and also like scatters low income people into historically disadvantaged areas. So for me, when I was thinking about it and how my main character in the book sees it as well, where we're like she's not thinking of gentrification as this process of like urban renewal in a positive way. She's thinking of it as these tidal waves of erasure that are trying to displace her community. So that's really what she's standing up against, um, this sense that she's feeling her home slip away and she's feeling her community, be dispersed. And with that, the character and the culture and the history of her neighborhood is slipping away. And what's being replaced with is exactly what you said, like luxury high rise buildings that kind of cater to, typically cater to like a white corporate middle class taste palette that um, doesn't really leave her a lot of room for a lot of the specific cultures of the place where she grew up, where she doesn't like that the stuff that's coming into the neighborhood, they all kind of look the same and they're all kind of catering to the same people. And there's this process of kind of homogenizing her neighborhood, both in terms of the people and the businesses, so the whole vibe of the place. And that's what she's really having issue with, the erasure of her community and the culture that comes along with it.
I know this is going to be a very complex question, and we've got about 4 minutes left. But I'm just gonna,
Let's hear it. Try it.
I'm just gonna throw it out anyways. How do you improve a community without destroying the community? And when I say community, I mean the spirit.
Yeah, that's a great question, and that is the central question that the characters in the book grapple with, because in There Goes the Neighborhood, it's kind of an ensemble cast where there's the main friend group, there's some new friends to the neighborhood, but you also are hearing from their neighbors, from their cousins, and everyone who's around. And nobody's really on the same page exactly when it comes to answering that question, where you have some people, and there's a part in the book where you have a conversation with some neighbors who have been there for even longer than Rhea. They're older people and they're saying, hey, like we're Black African American homeowners and we want to see an increase in our home values, and that shouldn't be a bad thing. So you have people coming with that perspective. And on the other hand, you have people saying, like, well, like, if wealth is coming into the neighborhood, but it's only going to some people, that's not going to lift us all up. So we shouldn't stand for that. So in the book, especially because I write for a young adult audience, I think teenagers are really, I didn't want to give it like a black or white answer for them. I wanted to show them the whole spectrum of how messy these conversations are, because I think teenagers, especially like Gen Z now, is so, I think they really like welcome like nuance and gray area to conversations. So I think for me, one of the things that is represented in the book a lot is this idea of mutual aid, this idea that you can ground into your community and foster connections with neighborhoods, with your neighbors, that can really protect everyone. So like an example is like if there's an elderly neighbor who's not able to grocery shop for themselves, like in a well-connected neighborhood where people know each other, this is a person that might otherwise be vulnerable, but if they have neighbors checking in on them, people who can drop off groceries, that person's protected. And then that kind of, that has a ripple effect where it kind of helps everyone feel a little bit more safer. So one of the things I think about in terms of how to like protect the spirit of a community is making sure that when change does happen, there's still like active communication and connection happening with neighbors. Because I think with gentrification, sometimes what happens is there's a lot of tension between when new people come versus old residents, because there's a lack of communication. And sometimes it's due to language, like sometimes there are reasons for why that the communication doesn't happen. But I think the cost of that is, when you're not talking to your neighbors, someone might call the police on a party next door because it's going late. But if you knew your neighbors, you'd know that it was your neighbor's baby shower, and like maybe you would have been invited if you like talked to them more. So that's one of the things that I try to talk about, the importance of preserving channels of communication with neighbors, and then also the importance of, whether you're old or new resident, really shopping in the neighborhood, staying invested in the local economy, supporting businesses that have already been there is important as well. And yeah, there's a bunch of other different ideas that are raised in the book of different perspectives, but I think when it comes to preserving the character of the neighborhood, nurturing the connections between neighbors, helps keep people grounded and prevents that alienation and isolation that can often like lead to ultimately like the displacement of your neighbors. So doing whatever you can to help keep people there economically and also socially, I think is really valuable.
Well, I like that answer. I think that was a great answer to a very complex question. And on
Yeah.
that, we got to wind down the interview. We are out of time. Thank you so much for coming on.
Oh,
Uh,
thank you for having me. This was really great and super thoughtful questions.
Let me just mention the title because I don't think we did. There Goes the Neighborhood is the book,
Yeah.
and the author is Jade Adia. Do you have a website that you want to give out?
Yeah, anyone can find me on my website. It's just jadeadia.com. I'm also on Instagram at jadeadia as well. But yeah, welcome anyone who's interested in the book and wants to connect, and you can find me through my website.
Okay, the book is out now, right, and available?
Yes, the book is out and available. It came out on Tuesday. I just had the book launch with my community in the neighborhood where I grew up last night. So the book is officially launched.
Oh,
So you
great.
can find it there online or at your local indie bookstore.
Okay. Well, Jade, it was nice meeting you. Nice having a conversation with you. Best of luck with your book. I hope it does well.
Thank you so much, Douglas. Thank you for having me.